Every antioxidant combination needs to be studied in a human because you sometimes don't know if that combination is going to be pro-oxidant, antioxidant, or neutral, where they showed that when people took vitamin E and vitamin C, the adaptive benefits of exercise were completely eliminated. The only thing that's ever been proven to extend lifespan, and probably in our lifetime is ever going to be proven in humans, is...
Dr. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. My pleasure.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you because you've talked a lot about the mitochondria, which are very interesting organelles, and they're very relevant in like the health and longevity space as well. So I'm happy to talk with you about all things mitochondria. So essentially, maybe we can start with from high school. We know the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, but it's obviously a little bit more complex than that. So maybe you can give us like a more brief overview and introduction. What are the mitochondria?
Yeah, the mitochondria are thought to be an invader, if you will, of our cells. Probably 2 billion years ago, as we were evolving, we took on the mitochondria, which was thought to be essentially a form of purple photosynthetic bacteria. And what it did really is helped us to detoxify oxygen, but also, more importantly, to extract energy. So throughout 2 billion years of evolution, we've remained in close association with the mitochondria. So what they do is they provide our cells essentially with energy. Because they do that, it's called a symbiotic relationship. So we allow them to stay within our cell in order to conserve our energy and to provide more bang for the buck. As you mentioned, most people feel that it's just energy, it's the powerhouse of your cell, but mitochondria do many more things. And perhaps it's maybe more important to know what they do when they're not working that causes more of an issue. Certainly with aging, with the genetic mitochondrial diseases that I see, even with things like dysglycemia, things like obesity, when mitochondria don't work, it causes problems for the cell. So when mitochondria aren't working, not only do we not get enough ATP or energy, but we also can activate processes like inflammation, oxidative stress, so these free radicals which can damage protein, DNA, and lipids, which can then cause damage to the cell. There are various other processes. There's one called apoptosis or apoptosis, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which is a form of pre-programmed cell death. They're linked to shortening of our telomeres. And many people are aware that telomeres are essentially these replicometers at the end of our chromosome. And as we go through our life and we continually make new copies of DNA, these telomeres shorten, and when they get to a certain level, the cell kind of goes into a senescent state. So they are linked to many cellular processes. The other one, of course, that any older adult with thin muscles is aware of is we have smaller muscles, and we need energy to drive what's called protein synthesis. So when they're not working, they have a litany of effects on our cells. So keeping them healthy is an important construct when we think about healthy aging and healthy lifespan.
Yeah. I mean, that's very, I guess, somewhat surprising as well as very interesting. The idea that they're like a different life form inside of us, essentially, that help us to produce energy. And without your mitochondria, life as we know it would probably not like exist as humans, or maybe would have developed some different kind of adaptations. But like, how big of a role does the mitochondria play in just, let's say, aging and longevity?
Yeah, it's a good point. And we know that certainly humans cannot live without mitochondria. We have children who have severe mitochondrial disease, and sometimes they're dying in infancy. I'm called up to the neonatal ICU, and kids have what's called lethal infantile mitochondrial disease. And even then, they still have some functional mitochondria, but it's not enough to sustain life as we know it. So they're absolutely essential to life. What we see over time is even a small diminishment of mitochondrial function can contribute to muscles being thinner. Various theories of aging. One of them is this inflammaging, where there's low-grade inflammation, which can be linked partially to mitochondrial dysfunction. So there's a litany of deleterious effects that happen when these aren't functioning properly. But it's a very interesting point that evolutionarily what happened is, as a bacteria, it probably takes around 1,300 genes to make a mitochondria. we still have this little piece of mitochondrial DNA, which is really a throwback to the fact that they were bacteria at one point in time. And 37 or 38 genes, depending on how you look at it, are still encoded for by this little piece of mitochondrial DNA, which we get from our mums, and mums pass this on to all of their children. But that really forms the backbone of the mitochondria. And then the nucleus of our cell makes all of the other components, which then come in and help us to form these elegant structures, which exist in every cell in our body except for our red blood cells. And we see them in much higher abundance in important tissues like heart, brain, and muscle, where the high energy demand really dictates that we need lots of mitochondria in order to survive. Whereas other tissues, they're in lower abundance, but still important. We've even published with aging that we have mitochondrial dysfunction in skin, and that can, as we'll talk about later, improve with exercise training.
Yeah, that's interesting. You also mentioned that the mitochondria help us to detoxify like oxygen and produce energy, but one of the byproducts of that process is oxidative stress itself. So energy production by the mitochondria creates these reactive oxygen species. So breathing and being alive is causing oxidative stress and damage. And I guess over the course of decades and over your entire lifespan, or at least that was one of the old theories of aging, that the free radical theory of aging, that this exposure to oxidative stress throughout your lifetime is what drives aging. It's a bit more complex than that, but essentially, being alive is killing you. Literally, that it's causing this oxidative stress and inflammation just through the energy production itself.
Yeah, and it's certainly contextual. We need some degree of oxidative stress for human adaptation. So there's always a level of ROS, or reactive oxygen species, that are being produced, but we have two ways to combat this. We have endogenous antioxidants, things like manganese superoxide dismutase, catalase, the glutathione system, which help to detoxify it. So it usually keeps things in check for most individuals. We also can take exogenous antioxidants, things like vitamin E, vitamin C, and alpha-lipoic acid, CoQ10, etc. So that endogenous and exogenous pathway usually damp them down so we don't produce excessive amounts. It's interesting. We did studies years ago where we had older adults do exercise. And back then, 25 years ago, people said, oh my goodness, you're going to damage people because we know that aging is oxidative stress. Now you're exercising and causing more oxidative stress. However, it's a simplistic view because what happens is when we exercise, we produce these ROS. The cell senses this threat to cellular homeostasis. So what we do is we upregulate mitochondria to deal with the energy crisis. We upregulate antioxidant enzymes. And Johnny Parisi, one of my first graduate students, and I were some of the first to show that older adults, after training, increase their antioxidant defenses, and their level of chronic oxidative stress actually goes down. But certainly, many diseases that I see in the clinic with mitochondrial disease, ROS is particularly important. Friedreich's ataxia, for example, too much iron in your mitochondria, huge increase in ROS, and people are going blind, deaf, ataxic, heart issues. And there's so many ROS that bringing them down with antioxidants and exercise training is absolutely essential.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they also found with the free radical theory of aging, that if you completely eliminate all oxidative stress and reactive oxygen species, then that actually shortens the lifespan of like these model organisms. So yeah, you need some amount of these reactive oxygen species to increase your body's endogenous antioxidant defense systems.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And as you know, a similar vein to that point is when people completely suppress ROS production. For example, there was a study by Risto published in PNAS where they showed that when people took vitamin E and vitamin C, the adaptive benefits of exercise were completely eliminated in sedentary individuals who were doing exercise training. So there was none of the metabolic benefits because in theory, what happens is the ROS feeding through PGC1 alpha to upregulate mitochondrial biogenesis was blunted when you provide too many exogenous antioxidants. So to bluntly give everybody antioxidants, it's probably why many of the studies fail. One, they may not be getting to where you think they're going to be. If someone's exercising, you have to make sure that you're not blunting the benefits. So it's a very nuanced area, the provision of antioxidants to individuals.
Yeah. Yeah, I've mentioned that on my channel before, that the antioxidants, especially after exercise, seem to like blunt that response. And the same with like ice baths, which are also very anti-inflammatory, and they have like a similar effect by suppressing that inflammation. But I've never like went into that deep with it. So does it mean that you're just not really getting any benefits from the exercise? Obviously, you're still like exerting calories and energy. So what benefits are you specifically missing out on? Let's say if you do take high amounts of antioxidants after exercise, like are you not getting any the mitochondrial adaptations, or are you not getting any this long-term lower level of inflammation response?
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I think it's contextual. So if somebody is completely healthy and young, there's no increase in basal ROS. It may not be a good idea in the perfect 20-year-old healthy individual who's trying to achieve top sport to be taking antioxidants during a training session.
Hmm.
However, I used to race internationally in a number of sports, and I trained 7 days a week for 45 years. Crazy people like me who push themselves to going blind,
Right.
shutting down your gut and, pooping out blood. You push yourself so hard. That, I think, you're crossing into more pathology. So
Right.
certainly for real top sport athletes, especially multi-day events or pushing yourself to absolute extremes, I think you cross from physiologic adaptation into pathology. It's almost like a Starling curve. So
Mm.
in those scenarios, and certainly if we're doing a multi-day adventure race, or I'm racing a top sport and I've got to do 2 races back to back and weekend orienteering or something, and I think antioxidants help you to avoid the excessive ROS production. In basal training for an athlete, probably of no benefit. But certainly there are certain combinations of antioxidants, and we published some stuff and have some recent data as well that with overweight people who are overweight or obese, when they do exercise training, there are some benefits to certain types of antioxidants. But again, every antioxidant combination needs to be studied in a human because you sometimes don't know if that combination is going to be pro-oxidant, antioxidant, or neutral. And
Hmm.
it's very contextual. So proper clinical
Yeah.
trials are important before we try and extrapolate too much. But I think aging, obesity, and extreme sports are scenarios where antioxidant provision of the appropriate type can be of some benefit.
I want to take a quick break to let you know about my favorite wellness devices, which are the bond charge red light therapy devices. You've probably seen many of your favorite longevity influencers using these red light therapy devices, but do they actually work? Yes, they do. Red light therapy has been shown to have many benefits on skin anti-aging, hormone optimization, pain management, and even exercise performance. I use my device every day for 15 minutes, especially during the winter months when there's not much sunlight. It increases my energy in the morning and makes my skin glow. Just check out the testimonials on the bond charge website for the before and after pictures of other people. Most radiotherapy devices don't have the right wavelengths of light, which might mean you're not getting the claimed benefits. Bond Charge uses the exact wavelengths of light used in research, and they also have near-infrared light that's beneficial to the joints. Head over to bondcharge.com and use the code SIIM, SIIM, for a 15% discount. Yeah, so it's like when the person has a very high level of inflammation from like too much exercise or obesity or just being from aging, then it can be useful because the baseline inflammation level is already very high in that situation.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very much like a Starling curve.
Hmm.
You can as you go up the curve, there's adaptation, but then when you cross a certain threshold, you go down. So bringing oxidative stress down on the upslope brings you down in terms of function. If you're
Gotcha.
over that slope, which could be chronic inflammation from obesity, aging, or transient super high oxidative stress by overtraining, bringing the levels of ROS down, then your function actually goes up because you're on that downslope on the other side. So that's the way I conceptualize it, and that's where I really see the benefits is under periods of increased stress, be it your physiology by being overweight, obese, dysglycemic, or genetic mitochondrial disease or muscular dystrophy, and or as we get older. I mean, I'm almost 65 now, and clearly things do change, and I definitely take antioxidants. Now that
Mm,
I've crossed over
gotcha.
that threshold.
Gotcha. Yeah, I also saw some studies that elderly people who take antioxidants while exercising, they do see greater like benefits from the like bigger performance benefits from the exercise, like higher leg press or higher some grip strength than just exercise alone. So I guess that could be because of they have the higher baseline inflammation.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's no question that, again, everything is so contextual, and that's why, you can't broadly give sort of advice across the age spectrum and across the health spectrum. But it's almost a U-shaped curve, right? Because the top sport athletes who are really pushing super hard are probably crossing into pathology. And then on the flip side, those that are elderly, aging, muscular dystrophy, whatever, where there's that chronic basal adaptation, both are going to get this Starling curve adaptive benefit when you bring down reactive oxygen species.
Mm-hmm. Is there also like a dose response there? That how big of a dose would it have to be that it becomes harmful? Let's say exogenous antioxidants, vitamin C or NAC, something like that.
Yeah, it's difficult to know. So the challenge that you have there is that the dose is one thing. You have to have an effective dose. I see so many supplements that are being sold with homeopathic levels, and people put a bunch of antioxidants together. They hand wave, and they charge a whole bunch for these things. But the doses are far too low to have any effective benefit in a human. And
Mm.
certainly, the other issue that we found is the combination is very, very critically important. So the vitamin E and vitamin C, if you're overweight and you're training, the Risto study would suggest that's not a good combination. So I would avoid that. But keep in mind that vitamin C is more cytosolic. It's not going into the mitochondria. So if we want mitochondrial protection, which we do in our patients, or with aging, which we think is an important resource of the ROS, things like alpha lipoic acid, which is a cofactor in three of the important mitochondrial enzymes, coenzyme Q10, bridge between complex 1 and complex 2 in the mitochondria, plus giving redox couples. So it becomes very, very contextual to what you're giving, the doses that you're giving to make sure that they're effective in a human. And that's why, certainly our research, we look at stuff in animals and cell culture, but we're really not convinced until we go into the human, and then we can see, does this dose work on average in this specific patient group and or group of athletes.
Gotcha. Yeah. What about the endogenous antioxidants then? You mentioned that these increase when you are exercising and they have a positive effect. So, yeah, how should we think about these endogenous antioxidants?
Yeah, again, very few studies have actually looked at that. So, in terms of providing exogenous antioxidants, it is very likely, and I can't think of a study, we didn't even look at this, where we actually measured the blunting of endogenous antioxidants. But I think they probably come to an equipoise, right? So, more of the exogenous, and then you don't upregulate as much of the endogenous. But what one has to do is just make sure that the adaptation that you care about, if it's glycemic control, muscle strength, bone, uh, sprint performance, endurance performance, that those outcomes that we're looking at are actually favorably enhanced by whatever intervention you're doing. And we know for older adults, leg strength is critical to health span and longevity. Even grip strength is VO2 max is very, very strongly correlated to health span. So,
Mm.
you want to make sure that those metrics are measured for an older adult, and or if you're an endurance athlete, VO2 max and anaerobic threshold and all of these other important factors need to be appropriately determined in response to the intervention that you give.
Mhm. Yeah, as I understand, then it's better for your health to take. If you ever were to try to supplement antioxidants, it's like better to take some of the precursors, so your body would make the antioxidants themselves rather than just take the straight up antioxidants. So let's say glutathione, it's better to take glycine and NAC than to just let's say like an average situation. Maybe there are specific situations where glutathione is a better option, but like as a general person who is just taking certain supplements for health and wellness, then in that situation it's better to take the precursors because then your body can also like auto-regulate how much glutathione it will produce from them.
Yeah, it's a difficult concept. I mean, in theory that may work, but again, I just emphasize it's so important when you start talking about antioxidants to measure it in a human. So many people provide antioxidants, to a human, and they assume that they're functioning as antioxidants in that human. And it's
Mm.
critical that in the context that you're looking at, that you actually measure, is it truly functioning? We did a study, for example, which has got me onto this years ago. We were following up on some of the work that Julie St. Pierre was doing when she was working with Bruce Spiegelman, and she was looking at the link between ROS and PGC1 alpha expression. So we tried to do a study with muscle biopsies looking at mRNA abundance 3 hours after an acute bout of exercise. So in vitro, we came up with this mixture of antioxidants. We just picked everything off the shelf, glutathione and vitamin C, vitamin E, selenium, blah, 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 threw it all together, and it was incredible antioxidant in vitro. We couldn't even generate free radicals. They were just eaten up so much in the ORAC assay. So the ORAC assay was just the most potent antioxidant you could possibly imagine. We gave it to the folks, and when we finished the study, it went in the opposite direction. So I thought my
Mm.
student must have mixed up the columns or something. And as it
Right.
turns out, these antioxidants, when we gave them to humans in the human body after you go through absorption, digestion, all the metabolic processes going on, became a pro-oxidant. So when we actually looked at markers of oxidative stress, they're actually higher with the antioxidants. So
Wow.
again, there's so
Interesting.
much misinformation about antioxidants that's out there, where people are assuming that some mixture, which sounds really good, and even in vitro it looks great, but you give it to a human, you've got to measure.
Mm.
And our cocktail that we came up with for our mitochondrial patients in 2007, we did a randomized double-blind crossover study with a combination of alpha lipoic acid, coenzyme Q10, vitamin E, and creatine. We showed with 2 markers of oxidative stress in humans with genetic mitochondrial disease, we could lower lactate and lower the 2 markers of oxidative stress.
Mm.
Whereas everyone said, Mark, we don't know what's working, typical drug-centric approach. We want
Mm.
one compound, that's it, which is sort of illogical when we're treating complex disease. But anyhow, I went ahead, did a clinical trial with huge doses of coenzyme Q10, which many people are familiar with as a fairly popular antioxidant, 600 milligrams twice daily of hydrosoluble CoQ10, and we showed absolutely no reduction in oxidative stress whatsoever.
Mm.
So again, we have to be very careful about what studies we're looking at to
Gotcha.
really know, is it truly functioning in the way that you expect that it's doing so.
So in your research, the combination of those ingredients was superior to just the CoQ10 alone, which CoQ10 is thought to be like a mitochondrial supporting agent, but I guess in your case, you needed to combine it with certain ingredients to get the best effect.
Absolutely. And part of
Mm.
that is, number one, if you put 2 agents together, make sure they're going to end up in the same spot, because when free radicals are produced, they last for femtoseconds and they don't cross membranes. So free radicals produced in the mitochondria are not going to be buffered by an antioxidant like uric acid that sits in the cytosol or vitamin C. So
Mhm.
our logic behind that, what we call the mitochondrial core, which is now standard of care for our patients, and forms the basis of a number of different concoctions we've come up with for obesity and aging and other things. So what we found is that we wanted the vitamin E to protect membranes. We wanted the creatine because of the creatine phosphocreatine shuttle in and out of the mitochondria, and studies have shown it has some antioxidant potential. But then we also wanted the alpha lipoic acid and the CoQ10 as a redox couple, knowing that both coexist in the mitochondria. So they're close to the proximate source of the reactive oxygen species. And again, till you study it in a human, you don't know. And these patients are severe. So put it into context, as we sit here, our VO2 is around about 3.5 to 4 milliliters per kilogram per minute. These patients at VO2 max, 7 to 8 mils per kilogram per minute. So even a
Mm.
sedentary person is going to be 20 to 30 for most people. So these patients are profoundly impaired, and still we were able to lower the ROS and to lower their
Mhm.
lactate values.
Yeah. So what about exercise? I think most people in the know do think that exercise is one of the best ways to support mitochondrial health. So, what is happening with exercise? Why is it so good for the mitochondria?
Yeah, exercise really is the gold standard. I mean, all of this hand waving just makes me sick to think about people saying that they're lifespan extension. There's videos, and there's even Netflix films on people trying to extend their lifespan. The only thing that's ever been proven to extend lifespan, and probably in our lifetime that's ever going to be proven in humans, is endurance exercise. So it's very clear that there's meta-analyses, and there's been data for the last 20 to 30 years that has come out clearly showing that regular endurance exercise gives us about a 4-year lifespan extension. More importantly, it gives us a 10-year health span extension. And why does it do so? It does so because exercise is a dirty drug. That's the way I think about it. So exercise increases mitochondria, it increases your antioxidant defense systems, it increases heat shock proteins. And that's probably why things like episodic saunas are probably beneficial. Any stressor to the body is physiology. Our body is going to adapt, and it's going to respond better the next time it's exposed to stress. So heat shock proteins, lower basal inflammation. So pretty much any hallmark of aging you can think about, exercise has a favorable effect on it. So all of these people who embrace drugs and think they're going to come up with an exercise drug, with a single compound, it's going to fail, because exercise is just such a beautiful evolutionary process that has allowed humans likely to evolve as Homo sapiens, for the last 300,000 years, because of the multiplicity of benefits that it confers on the human body. And when we think about this garbage where people think that metformin or rapamycin is going to extend their lifespan, there's so many off-target effects and deleterious effects, which, other than extreme exercise, maybe getting atrial fib, which I've had, there's really no downside to proper exercise.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. With endurance exercise, it's something also very unique to humans. So humans are probably one of the best ultra-endurance species on the planet. So like we're not very fast in a sprint compared to like a cheetah. We're also not very fast compared to like a gazelle over the course of a few kilometers. But there's no other animal that can literally run like 100 kilometers and not bunk. So yeah, humans are pretty much like the ultra-endurance species. And, and it's also like what was evolutionarily selected for, because that is one of the forms of hunting we did in the past, was called like this persistence hunting, where you just chase down the gazelle for tens of kilometers. It just gets tired over time. Obviously, we're not going to catch it with a sprint, but over the course of many kilometers, that's how we catch it, because then it just gets too tired and it's not able to run anymore. So yeah, it's kind of evolutionarily selected for as well, that the humans that have survived up until this point, they were very good at ultra endurance sports.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because if you think about the out of Africa hypothesis, looking at mitochondrial DNA haplogroups, we assume somewhere between 250 and 300,000 years ago, the L0, which is the original mitochondrial haplogroup for Homo sapiens, came out likely somewhere in North-South Africa, and then came up through the Fertile Crescent about 80,000 years ago. And if you look at East Africa, it appears that endurance capacity was selected for. And that's where most Caucasians eventually came out through the Fertile Crescent there. And if we look now at the athletes in Kenya, Ethiopia, very, very skinny, very endurance rich. But if you look at the high plains there, that's where I think this endurance conferred advantage. But getting back, and I only just thought about this now that we're talking about it, if you look at West Africa, you look at the enrichment of muscle mass. So if you look at people winning the 100 meters, pretty much the top 100 or so, with rare exception, can ultimately trace their roots to West Africa. And the topography of the geography was different. So it's likely that there was some biological advantage conferred by big, large muscles in that slightly different topography versus the higher plains on East Africa. And when we think about the ultimate for aging, after all of my research comes together, and even being, previously at the international level endurance athlete, I was getting skinny, picking up my grandchildren, getting back pain. We need both as we get older. So we need both the endurance adaptation, and we also need the strength adaptation. And it's harder to measure the benefits of strength, because there's no study. Very few people did strength training their whole life. So we don't have the epidemiology to say, oh, if you do this your whole life, you're going to get lifespan or health span extension. However, we and others have clearly shown up to age 92 in our studies, you take an older adult, you give them an exercise training program, increase muscle mass, they can get up the stairs better, they can get off the floor better, they can get out of a chair and walk 10 meters better. All of those
Mm.
important metrics of health span are improved. So there's no question that optimal aging, we really need both to think about endurance, but also to be thinking about strength. And I certainly now try to titrate as best I can, 30, 40%
Mm.
of my training, more power and strength, as opposed to before, it was 100% endurance.
Yeah. Yeah. What is happening on like the mitochondrial level with exercise? Maybe obviously it's a bit different adaptations from let's say power and endurance. So, but with endurance, obviously there's maybe like the cardiovascular component that explains the longevity benefits with reduced heart disease. But what is like on the mitochondrial level happening? Like, are you building new mitochondria, or are you removing old mitochondria, or what's happening?
Yeah, it's interesting because people call it mitochondrial biogenesis, but we're likely, and they think about these little mitochondria as these perfect paramecium-like things in a cell, and then, oh, look, they double and they triple and we get more and more. But if you look at skeletal muscle, for example, a lot of that is a reflection of how we look at mitochondria. If you cut a muscle and you look at them, they look like a bunch of blobs. But if you do 3D reconstruction with various electron microscopes, you can see that it's an incredibly intricate reticulum. And so what we have is not just little blobs floating around, but this incredible, almost like fungus underground, interactive Borg species where they're all together. And so what happens throughout our life is we do encounter a number of stressors, whether you have overexercise, maybe some toxins, whatever. Certain regions of that mitochondrial reticulum, for example, here I might get some ionizing radiation, cause some damage to the mitochondrial DNA energy charge, or delta Siim goes down. Eventually, it gets identified. So what happens is we then cleave off that piece through something called mitophagy. And the ability to remove damaged mitochondrial pieces and then to fuse together with mitofusins, the reticulum, to reestablish those connections and keep that reticulum healthy. That's very important. So what happens, we've done muscle biopsy studies after 3 months of endurance training. The reticulum of the mitochondria in skeletal muscle can go from about 2% of the volume of the muscle to 4%. So we can double the reticulum. So what happens is we actually get hypertrophy of the mitochondria. But again, it's an improvement of the reticulum. But we're also, I call it the pruning of the tree hypothesis. So if we can't remove the sort of stochastic accumulation of damage that happens throughout our lifespan, we eventually start to get damage. It's very much like a tree that wasn't pruned. And you probably look at a tree that wasn't pruned, you've got the few leaves that are all dying. But you prune your tree in the springtime and you get this beautifully growing tree. And I really think at a very simplistic level, that's really the way as we age, that's what happens to our mitochondria. If we sit on our butt, eat crap, and with your skin, you're exposed to ionizing radiation, don't use sunscreen, you're just going to keep damaging those mitochondria. And as we get older, if we can't undergo autophagy/mitophagy and clean them up, then we don't prune the tree and we have dysfunctional mitochondria. And part of the benefits of exercise, and with older adults, Johnny Parisi and I have shown that even with resistance training, doing standard weights, we actually do improve and prune up the tree. So younger people tend to get more hypertrophy, and that's all we see. We don't see much mitochondrial biogenesis when they lift weights. But older adults, we get mitochondrial biogenesis and strength improvements. So I think there's a bit more of I should say, lack of specificity, let's say, as people get older. So there's more bang for your buck.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for younger individuals, it's more beneficial to do obviously still like a mix of training, but you get more benefits for the mitochondria from endurance exercise when you're younger, and when you're older, you get any form of exercise will give benefits.
Absolutely. I think, and we've done studies too where we took older adults, we did 3 months of endurance, and then we flipped them to 3 months of resistance. And as you would expect during endurance, we get increases in VO2 and decreases in body fat, but no increases in strength. Then you do weight training, you see increases in strength, but no change in VO2. And muscle mass goes up, but body fat doesn't go down. So I think ultimately it's that mixture. But again, top sport athletes, you really don't want to be doing any weight training if you're a long ultra runner. You don't want that
Mm.
extra muscle mass. So for top performance, it's a little bit different. And I think the problem is a lot of exercise physiology was really focusing on the extremes. But when we start thinking about healthy aging, I think we need to blend things together a little bit more.
Yeah. What about high intensity interval training? Is that something different, or does it provide similar? Which category would it fall into?
Yeah, it kind of falls through the cracks a little bit, and Marty Gabala, whom I'm sure you're aware of, a good friend and colleague, we did a lot of the muscle biopsies and the mitochondrial work in our lab. And what we showed is it was very similar to what we call mixed moderate intensity continuous training, which is what most research has done with endurance. And the adaptations, you can split hairs here and there, and one study can show one or the other, but really they're very similar in terms of the mitochondrial adaptations that you get. The only issue is, I think at the end of the day, the type of exercise that works best for you is the one you're going to do. I hated intervals when I used to race at a high level. I loved long, slow distance stuff. And other buddies of mine hated the long distance. They loved doing intervals. So, I think whatever floats your boat, the only downside, I think, of the high intensity is certainly for older adults, if they have a knee issue or a back issue or something, likely a greater propensity for some musculoskeletal issues. But
Mhm.
if you enjoy it, then it might be the right thing for you. But you're going to get very similar benefits from properly done high intensity interval training as you are with the moderate intensity continuous.
Hmm. Yeah. One thing you already alluded a little bit earlier was muscle loss with age, so which is called sarcopenia, and apparently there's like some role for the mitochondria in that. That dysfunctional mitochondria lead to sarcopenia, or they have like a contributing effect to sarcopenia. So, can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
So essentially, what was shown, I think the best research was a fellow named Jed Aiken, who ran a lab looking at this concept and was the first really to show that with aging, if you do cross section, what you'll see is the muscle fibers that start to get mitochondrial dysfunction, the so-called cytochrome C oxidase negative fibers. We call them COX negative fibers. Those negative fibers were smaller. So what they did is they used laser capture microdissection to cut out the COX negative fibers. And in those fibers, they found mitochondrial DNA deletions, and they were associated with the reduction in mass. Some people thought, well, if you do a muscle biopsy and you homogenize it, depending on the age of the person, sometimes you don't see much mitochondrial dysfunction. So some people question the relationship. But if you think about it, aging happens very, very slowly. You're not losing more than 1 or 1.5% of your muscle mass per year as you get older. Even that would be a little bit accelerated. So that's a very difficult thing to measure. But what Jed showed, which is the way I think about it, muscle fibers are very, very long. And, if I have one area here that starts to get mitochondrial dysfunction, just like my reticulum, in that area, those mitochondria aren't providing the energy for muscle protein synthesis. And then that fiber will shrink a little bit. But then the rest of the fiber is pretty good. So you're getting almost like this starry sky pattern where these processes are occurring in the muscle randomly throughout. So unless you do, many hundreds of sections, which is what he did, you kind of miss these areas. And remember, once a fiber is gone, it's gone. You can't count it. So I think that's part of the, methodological reasons why some people were sort of discounting it. But I think Jed's data is pretty congruent. We also see it in our patients, for example, with chronic progressive external ophthalmoplegia or MELAS syndrome. In the ragged red fibers and the COX negative fibers, they are smaller, which is intuitively totally makes sense. If you don't have the energy for muscle protein synthesis, degradation will then exceed synthesis, and that region of the fiber is going to shrink. So I think it's pretty clear that mitochondrial dysfunction is a contributor. We also know that we lose about 30% of our alpha motor neurons from age 30 to about age 65. There's a little bit of sprouting that goes on, but there is some work that mitochondria in the alpha motor neuron also likely is contributing. So I think there's this yin and yang between the alpha motor neuron and the muscle. But
Hmm.
collectively, anything we can do to maintain alpha motor neurons, like exercise, maintain mitochondrial function, prune that tree, keep the good mitochondria present, we can attenuate this. And Justin Crane, one of my PhD students, and I have clearly shown that top sport masters athletes maintain better strength and function versus sedentary individuals when they're in their 60s and stuff,
Hmm. Yeah.
with a much
Yeah. So
higher VO2 max too.
yeah. So every like cell has their own mitochondria, right? And so therefore every neuron also has their own mitochondria.
Very much so, yeah.
And yeah, is like the decline in the mitochondria inside those neurons and in those muscle cells is kind of the first domino um, that leads to the domino effect, or how does it go in your opinion?
Well, no one really knows, which comes first, but the two can work in both ways. So you can
Okay.
imagine that if in my muscle there's a region where I have dysfunctional mitochondria and it's not properly pruned out, and then I get an atrophic fiber, the neuromuscular junction can pull away from that fiber, and then that can have a retrograde effect on the alpha motor neuron. Conversely, if you think about an alpha motor neuron, you've got this big cell body that's in the anterior part of your spinal cord, and then all the proteins have to go down with these dynamine motors all the way down, sometimes 1.5 meters. So if you have dysfunction here, and then we're not keeping those neurons intact, and or as we start to lose some of the muscle fibers, we can't get collateral sprouting, which requires protein synthesis. Then muscle affects nerve, nerve affects muscle. So I think the two are integrally related, and researchers who start debating it's only one or it's only the other, I think are missing out on the complexities of the human body, that it's never just one or the other. It's usually an interaction between two. But
Yeah.
clearly, we haven't published this yet, but we've shown that lifelong exercise in mice definitely maintains the alpha motor neuron pool, and a few others have shown that as well.
Hmm. Gotcha. What about nutrition? So we mentioned a few of these supplements, ingredients that have benefits on the mitochondria, like CoQ10, etc. Is there any like specific, I guess, nutritional equivalent to exercise, or something that is very important to maintain the mitochondrial health?
Well, we do know, and work that Stu Phillips and I did after endurance exercise, that there is an activation of protein synthesis after endurance exercise. And as we've known for years after resistance exercise, resistance tends to be more in the fibrillar component, so the contractile proteins synthesis goes up. Uh, Stu and I, doing biopsies and measuring preparation into mitochondrial function, show that there is protein synthesis going following endurance exercise. So, what my very first paper in 1988, if you can believe it, was one of the first to show that top sport endurance athletes required more protein, almost twice the Canadian and U.S. FDA at the time. And at the time, people said, "Well, that doesn't make any sense. You're skinny little runts. Like, why do you need this extra protein?" I think part of it is likely that you do have this turnover of mitochondria. There are other enzymes that are upregulated, the mitochondrial creatine kinase, uh, the glycogen synthesis goes up. There's just so many enzymes that are upregulated that there is an increased need for protein. Um, we did a study, which I'm hoping to publish in the new year, one of my previous postdocs, where we took top triathletes and tried to put them on the Canadian DRI. Many people were dropping out after a week. They could not maintain their training on the zero point 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body mass,
Mm.
whereas our estimate for top athletes is 1.6 to 1.7. On that, of course, that's what they were habitually taking in. But we tried to drop them down to what our government said was fine, and they were tanking. We didn't actually measure the various components of the protein, but I think it's pretty clear from subsequent work. You're failing to make new mitochondria. You're failing to keep all of the enzyme adaptations that we get with endurance exercise if we don't feed enough protein. So we think of protein always to maintain muscle mass. And that's been well shown with older adults. Probably 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram per day. Again, contextual. No two proteins are the same. Collagen protein, which is low biological value, versus milk-based protein. The milk obviously can get by with a slightly lower amount. So if you have
Mm.
a poor quality protein, obviously and that's important to support the endurance adaptation, but also the resistance or muscle mass component.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So 1.6 grams per kilogram is for like athletes.
Yeah, 1.6, 1.7. We came up with that. I think it was 1.67 with nitrogen balance, but subsequently people have used various stable isotope tracers to show very similar numbers from top sport athletes. Uh, Wim Saras did some work on the guys that were doing the Tour de France and came up with a very similar number. So back then, I was laughed at. People said it's crazy. There's no way that its athletes need more protein. But I think multiple lines of evidence, Vim's for the Tour de France folks, other folks with stable isotopes, it's pretty clear that 1.7 is the maximum that a top sport endurance athlete needs. And most people are getting that in. The reason why it's important is that people restrict, and there are people that go on crazy diets and they have low quality protein, high collagen protein, for example, or low energy if they're trying to lose weight. Those are the folks who losing protein and subsequently compromising their performance. We even
Hmm.
did a study with young women athletes. They were in their 20s, and just changing the timing of protein put them into a more positive nitrogen balance. So we gave them 20 grams of protein with breakfast or 20 grams right after workout. And when we gave it to them right after workout, they were in a more positive nitrogen balance and performed better at the end of a week of a simulated training camp. Yeah, so the first study that we did in patients with genetic mitochondrial disease was to target some of the final common pathways of mitochondrial dysfunction. So what we did was included two antioxidants, which we know are in the mitochondria, coenzyme Q10 and alpha-lipoic acid. They're also important cofactors in the electron transport chain and three other metabolic pathways, respectively, with alpha-lipoic acid. We also put in vitamin E to provide some membrane protection as a chain-breaking antioxidant, knowing also that we have complex membranes, including the inner and outer mitochondrial membrane. And then on top of that, knowing that creatine can help to buffer, at least in the rest exercise transition, that drop in ATP. We knew that ATP levels were low in the brain of our mitochondrial patients. They drop quickly and recover slowly after exercise in our patients. So we included creatine for that reason, but also creatine is an important signaling molecule. The creatine phosphocreatine shuttle that Theo Wallimann first proposed is important to sort of kickstart the mitochondria. So we had those four together. We did a randomized double-blind crossover study with a washout. And what we showed is the markers of mitochondrial dysfunction in our patients: lactate, which is an indicator of impaired mitochondrial function, and two markers of oxidative stress: 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine and 8-isoprostanes were lower when they were on the active versus the placebo. So that was our first study. We were criticized because everybody is very pharma-centric, and that's been sort of the way everyone's thought about treatment for the last 50 years and still continues to be the issue. And so everyone wants to identify one compound that's patentable, and identify the target, engage the target, look at the PKs, and go through clinical trials. So we were criticized saying, you used a final common pathway approach with multi-ingredients. We think it's just CoQ10. So we did a study with very high doses of coenzyme Q10, the new water-soluble form, 600 milligrams twice daily, and showed absolutely nothing. No lowering of lactate, no lowering of oxidative stress markers. And I think part of that is any antioxidant can become a pro-oxidant. Many antioxidants need redox couples. And in addition, we really need to have antioxidants present where the free radicals are being produced, given this specific situation. Free radicals are produced, locally in response to different biochemical pathways, and they have very short distances over which they affect. So if you've got an antioxidant, the cytosol, and the roster generated the mitochondria, you miss the boat. You're not going to be able to buffer it. So that's where we started, and we've gone on. In full disclosure, we actually started a company based on this to treat obesity, where we took that mitochondrial base or core, whatever you want to call it, and then we added to it depending on the circumstance. So for obesity, we looked at a whole host of supplements which were helpful: green tea extract, green coffee bean extract, black tea extract, forskolin, and CLA, which probably have the best support in humans and animal models. And we found that those were very effective, but they were synergized with the mitochondrial cocktail addition. Interestingly, the mitochondria cocktail that we just described, even with beetroot extract to increase nitrates, was okay from an obesity perspective, but it was really synergized when we put all 10 together. But even more so, when we pulled out 3, we had this sort of unexpected synergistic effect to increase mitochondria in the fat cells. And we've also shown protection in the muscle as well from hypoxia with that combination. We've published papers, didn't file patents on some of these for improvement in mitochondria in the skin, using, again, that core, but we used other things like biotin. So I think, when someone says, what antioxidants work, first, they've got to be proven in humans to do what you think they're going to do. Safety is important. Tolerance is important. And, in our company, and my thought process is to start with the core that was proven to work. And then depending on the indication, you can add or subtract certain things, always keeping the core from what we've shown is beneficial. What I can say is we have done experiments where we took, 15 antioxidants, at least labeled as antioxidants, put them into a mixture, and turned out that they became pro-oxidants in the human. So a lot of the brands that are out there, a lot of the research is hand-waving, even with some of the drugs that are supposed to lower oxidative stress. And it's actually never been proven in the physiology and pathology of a human to do what people think it's going to do. But because it's labeled an antioxidant, they think it's functioning as such. So that's a big caution, I would say, for most people.
Yeah, gotcha. So CoQ10 alone is one of the more commonly known mitochondrial supplements. So CoQ10 alone necessarily isn't enough.
I don't believe so, and that's based on strong experimental evidence. So those were large numbers. The second study, 30 people, proven genetic disease. We did spectroscopy, cycloergometry, and didn't show what we showed with the combination. My firm belief, which was a hypothesis I put forward in 2001, is that to effectively target aging and complex biochemical disturbances in pathologies, we can't just rely on a single drug or a single agent. And I think, at the end of the day, when I was younger and studying exercise a lot, people said, well, you're not really a neurologist, you're not really a proper scientist because exercise is dirty. But that's the beauty of exercise, is it is a dirty drug, and that's why it's the only thing that's been shown to extend lifespan in a human and increase health span, because it has this multiplicity of benefits. And therefore, I don't think a single drug or a single nutrient is going to have anywhere close to the benefits that exercise and properly targeted and clinically studied multi-ingredient supplements are going to come close to. And then finally, it's very important, and we've shown clearly with our combinations, that they have to work with exercise, because there is a concern that certain antioxidants can blunt the benefits of exercise. For example, vitamin E and vitamin C together, and a good study in PNAS was shown to blunt the adaptive benefits of exercise. So we study our stuff in mice, preclinical work, and more importantly, in humans, to prove that we're not blunting the important benefits we get from exercise.
Yeah, that's a very important point. What about, are there any specific mitophagy supplements? So it's the process of clearing out old mitochondria. Do you think there's any evidence in that area?
Yeah, there's no question that the best way to clean up your mitochondria is, the hypothesis put forward about 15, 20 years ago. Is that I think the benefits of exercise in older adults when they start exercising is to put the mitochondria through an acute physiologic stress, induce mitophagy, clean up the bad mitochondria that have accumulated throughout your life, and you're left with a better mitochondria. And it's that physiologic stress cleanup mitophagy that I think really gives you better mitochondria, more so after you've accumulated damage through life. So then everyone is getting all excited about trying to activate autophagy. I will say that doing stuff in a petri dish only, and even in animals, you can be misled. We can take almost any compound. We can take rotenone, which is a toxin for complex 1. We can take sugar. We can take almost anything, put it in a petri dish, and induce autophagy. So big deal. Anyone can do that. And all you have to do is change the timing, the duration, and the concentration of certain supplements, drugs, even nutrients, and you can induce autophagy. So I am completely underwhelmed with any group that says that they have an autophagy inducer, a mitophagy inducer with in vitro work. Animal work is difficult to extrapolate as well. We've had many discrepancies between animals and humans. So ultimately, it comes down to do these do something in humans? And again, it's contextual. Is it working on top of exercise? I've not seen a study that's ever shown in a human with any of these so-called, mitophagy inducers that they conferred any benefit over and above what you're already getting from exercise. Number two, I don't want to get too much into it, but the most famous one, of course, which everyone's familiar with, MitoPure, the name, that they came up with was that you're purifying the mitochondria with urolithin A. When you look at the human data, the 500 milligram versus the 1,000 milligram dose in middle-aged humans, there's a complete discrepancy between the supposed mechanism of action and what it's supposed to do. So when phosphoparkin went up, there was no increase in mitochondria. When mitochondria went up, phosphoparkin didn't go up. So they're trying to say, and the title of new papers coming out is the mitophagy inducer urolithin. So the title of the paper is misleading and telling you what it's supposed to do.
Right.
But when you start looking at it, I think that the data is not as strong as the advertising, the name of the drug is meant to be. Now, I think it may well be a component of a multi-ingredient supplement that could confer benefits. But again, do it in humans, do it in a proper GCP, a good clinical practice, clinical trial in humans and in the target group that you're looking at. And for me, every disease I see, aging, I'm a big proponent of the benefits of exercise. So you have to be either not inhibiting the benefits of exercise and then conferring something over and above exercise, maybe in a different way. So your VO2, if it still goes up by the same amount, but you're losing more body fat, for example, that's a benefit. But you cannot attenuate the benefits of exercise with a supplement. So that's why we're big proponents of testing with exercise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time and knowledge. Before I ask my last question, where can people learn more about you and your work?
Thanks so much. It's been my pleasure, and enjoy.
Where can people learn more about you and your work?
Well, obviously, from a full disclosure perspective, of course, we started the company based on all this work, and that company is Exerkine, and Stay Above Nutrition is the sort of nutritional component to it. People just need to PubMed to see that we've actually done work. I think, as you probably aware, there's a lot of people who are talking the talk but not walking the walk. There's very famous people, Peter Attia and others, never published a paper in his life in nutrition or aging, and yet everyone in the world knows these people. So, the one thing I think that we do, and some of my colleagues like Stu Phillips, is, we're actually doing the research. And it's very difficult because you're laying yourself out there for criticism. All of our raw data is available, even the stuff from our company. We don't hold anything back. All of our raw data is held by 5 independent people outside of the company. So upon reasonable request, people can take our data and make sure that it's data locked. And
it was great to talk with you. And my last question is, what's this one piece of advice or habit that you wish you adopted sooner?
I think more weight training, more resistance training. Unfortunately, I was an elite endurance athlete, and I raced really hard to the point of needing 3 cardiac ablation surgeries. Did well, but you're skinny and you hurt your back picking up your children. Clearly, with aging, everything we've done shows that mixing endurance and resistance is the healthiest aging. The other thing, so 2 things. One is I wish I did more resistance. Number 2, I wish that I knew what I knew now about certain supplements, and the fact that when you're working at really high levels of elite endurance sport, these crazy races where you go for 3 days, there is some damage that occurs. And I wish that I had better attention to my protein, and I wish I was taking some of the antioxidants that I now take with healthy aging, having had 3 cardiac ablation surgeries, overexertion for too many years.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like a balance between both types of exercise is
Absolutely.
important.
Balance in exercise and proper supplementation.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, and definitely looking forward to your future studies and work.
Thanks very much. There's a lot coming out. Just stay tuned.
Yeah, thank you.